I'm joined now by one of the Democrats you heard there on the House floor, Democratic Congresswoman Jahana Hayes of Connecticut, who serves on the House Education and Labor Committee and represents the Newtown community where the Sandy Hook Elementary School mass shooting took place. Congresswoman, it seemed extremely emotionally fraught and intense in that House chamber today. What was it like in there?
It was incredibly emotional for me. I was thinking about my constituents and the people back at home because, as you can imagine, this is deeply personal for the people in Connecticut, for the people in Newtown. And just to hear my Republican colleagues come up with a string of whataboutisms and excuses for why, never saying she should be placed on a committee, but deflecting to so many different arguments, was incredibly emotional on the floor today.
You know, it struck me as I watched this today that part of what was happening, and I'd like to hear your response to this, is that the House hasn't grappled with what happened on January 6th in any formal way. The fact that a majority of Republicans voted to overturn a Democratic election, the fact that a mob of violent insurrectionists invaded the place that you work, threatening the lives of people that you work with. There hasn't been any institutional processing of that. And it felt to me today like this vote on Marjorie Taylor Greene was standing in as a kind of proxy for that.
I would say I agree with you. You're absolutely right, because I myself am still processing the events of January 6th, and this wound is reopened over and over and over again. While I heard people talk about the merits of the election or the events of January 6th, the fact that violent words incited the actions of January 6th, all of this really is playing in the back of members' minds as we attempt to legislate. And you saw, rightfully so, the impacts of that play out on the floor. I do not know if the turnout today would have been different had members not had in their recent memory just the final result of insightful words.
Final question for you is the precedent this sets. It is true that this is, we don't know if it's been done before, but as far as we can tell, this is new and unprecedented. It is also true that when Republicans say, you know, you're setting a precedent here and watch out in the future, what is your response to that?
I think it's a more dangerous precedent to let members' violent rhetoric and their hateful words go unchecked. I think that's the dangerous precedent that was set. I don't think that this has happened before, but I led a letter, and within a couple hours, I had 130 of my colleagues who signed on to say that she should not be seated on committees. I think the fact that the Republican leader placed her on the Committee of Education and Labor was just an insult to many of my colleagues. I can tell you there were Democrats who had issue with this vote, who struggled, who did not want to disrupt proper procedure or protocol. But for the fact that the Republicans refused to act and placed her on the Committee of Education and Labor, every parent, every teacher, every community member, every person who is still reeling from the fact that we have a problem with mass shootings in our country, specifically on school grounds, and we need to address those problems, I think was the impetus that led many of my colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, to say enough.
Congresswoman Jahana Hayes, representative from Connecticut, thank you so much for time tonight.
Thanks so much, Chris.